Shabbat Shalom. I think this is called preaching to the choir today. The day after Rosh Hashanah finished, I think Rosh Hashanah was a Monday, Tuesday, so that Wednesday, the day after Rosh Hashanah, I have the opportunity, I get to take the boys to school, so I drop them off at Hillel Day School, and I drive back home, and I take out my cell phone after getting back home, and there's a text message from one of my rabbinic colleagues in the community. And the text message said, "Do you need me to help you with anything today?" I thought about it for a moment, and then I started to panic. What did I forget in the midst of Rosh Hashanah? Am I supposed to be teaching at Hillel? Am I supposed to be at a meeting? Am I supposed to be somewhere in the community? The text message said, "Do you need me to help you with anything today?" So I texted him back. I said, "Am I supposed to be somewhere? What am I missing?" And he texted me back again, and he said, "No, I just thought since I don't have to do any tikkun olam today, I had time on my hands, and you might need help with something." So it was at that point that I decided that maybe what people heard that day of Rosh Hashanah may not have been what I had intended them to say. So that's what inspired me to put the text of my sermon out there on the internet and to get it out. And since then, I've heard from people around the world, quite literally, emails, letters, phone calls from people around the world wanting to engage and talk about the sermon. Now, some people couldn't understand why I would say we should never do nice things for other people. Of course, that's not what I said. I had other people who said, "How come you came out against Israel and in favor of just the Palestinians?" I couldn't figure out how they got that. You name it, that's what somebody heard out of that sermon. So I wanted to get the text out there. It's a good reminder to all of us that what we hear is not always what was communicated. As a Jewish husband, I know this to be the case. As a husband, period. Okay, there we go. So we need to be very careful with what we hear and how we listen. And in fact, I even tried something because in total honesty, the week before Rosh Hashanah, I delivered my sermon to a few kind victims who I make listen to the first draft of it, and I realized that they missed the point of my sermon. And so I had to go back and rewrite it, and I appreciate that because then I can, have a few people who say, it was just mediocre, go back and do it again. It's my opportunity to make it a better before I speak to a few thousand people. And so that's when I decided I needed to be even clearer with my message, and I tried this soundbite technique, right? That it's time to say Kaddish for Tikkun Olam. Now, had I put the headline in the Times of Israel, had I made the headline for my sermon, Jews should really do more rituals, I'm not sure I would have quite gotten the same feedback, or at least the quantity of feedback, right? But that soundbite, people heard those words and those words only, and that triggered a response. So it makes us ask this week, what does it mean to really listen? And if we turn to our Torah portion, you're welcome to turn with me in your Eitz Chaim Chumashim. I'm on page 1185, the very beginning of our Torah portion this morning. The Torah says, Haazinu hashamayim va'adabeira. Give ear, O heavens. Let me speak. Let the earth hear the words I utter. Now remember, this is Moses' final address to the Jewish people before he dies and they continue on to the promised land without him. And as Rabbi Dahlin beautifully articulated earlier, here was the man who, you remember, early in his prophetic career was so afraid of his ability to speak, he asked that his brother Aaron come serve as his spokesman. Right? If you want to accept the Midrash, he had burned his tongue as a child, maybe he had a lisp, maybe he just wasn't a good speaker. And so he needed Aaron, his brother, to act as spokesman for him. Well, some 40 years later, the man who needed his brother to act as spokesman for him before Pharaoh now offers his final words to the Jewish people in the form of a poem. It's really quite a beautiful journey that Moshe himself was on. And so in this final poem, he really reminds our ancestors of the journey that their parents went on. Remember, their parents died off in the wilderness. This is the new generation coming forward. And so here Moshe begins his address not with the word for listen that we might assume, right? What word do we typically connect with hearing or listening? Shema, right? We know earlier, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, Moshe says, Shema Yisrael, listen, you people of Israel. But that's not what he says here. Here he says, Haazinu, give ear. Now, some commentators suggest that this is Moshe speaking in poetry, right? It's just a more beautiful way of calling heaven and earth to witness. But perhaps Moshe is trying to tell us something else. Don't just listen. Hear. Or maybe don't just hear. Listen. Haazinu. Give your ear. Really pay attention to it. Or as my father says, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Take the hint. Give ear and really listen. Now, who is he asking to listen? According to Rashi, Moses is calling heaven and earth to serve as witnesses for what he's about to tell the Jewish people, that he's about to reaffirm the covenant with them. So Rashi says, this is just Moses saying, give ear, heavens and earth, right? Bear witness to what I'm about to say. Rashi's grandson, the Rashbam, disagrees, or at least he disagrees in part. He says, no, Moses is saying to heaven and earth, if the Jewish people don't fulfill the brit, it's up to you, heaven and earth, to punish them for it. And that's why Moses is calling upon heaven and earth to really listen, to really focus. But I love this comment too by the Khatam Sofer much more recently at the bottom of the Eitz Chaim. What does the Khatam Sofer suggest? He says, listen to me, you spiritual people whose thoughts are in heaven, and also you down-to-earth people whose concerns are more material. This message is meant for all of you. The Khatam Sofer comes to say, Moses knows exactly who he's speaking to. He's speaking to those who are able to elevate themselves spiritually and are metaphorically in the heavens. And he's speaking also to those who yet hadn't ascended in quite that way, those who are still grounded on earth. And Moshe says to them, look, I'm going to tell you the emes here. I'm going to give you the truth about God and the history of the Jewish people. Haazinu, listen. Give ear. Give your whole self to really hearing. Now, I would suggest the challenge of listening, of really listening, is not unique just to Jewish husbands. And it's probably not even unique to husbands in general. How often do all of us listen to another person, and before they've even finished speaking, we're thinking in our head what our response is going to be? We can process that much faster. So already before the other person has finished speaking, we've stopped listening, and we already are thinking about how we're going to respond. Now, we've seen this in debates on television, and we know it from our own lives, that sometimes it becomes very easy to stop listening and to start responding. Imagine if we really made an effort, just for the next 24 hours, this Shabbat into tomorrow, to really genuinely listen to the person who's speaking to us. Imagine how different our relationships might be with friends, with family. And we not only listen to the words they're saying, but we haazinu, we give ear. And perhaps we give eye as well, and we really hear not just what they're saying, but how they're saying. We really focus on that listening. And imagine if when a rabbi is offering a sermon, we didn't already decide whether we've agreed or disagreed with him or her, but we really gave ear to that sermon. We really gave thought to the message. And imagine if when a chazan is davening, we don't just sing along, but we really give ear to the words of the Siddur, of the prayer book. We really pay attention Not only then to the words of the prayer book, but the kavanah, the intentionality with which the chazan is davening, that we can be inspired by it. Now, I always think it's an interesting message that among the smallest of services, in the terms of attendance, over the course of the year is the Shabbat right after Yom Kippur. Someone is doing something wrong, whether it's us or those perhaps unable to attend today. But we've just had the 10 most important days of the year, where we stand one-on-one before God, where we stand as a community before our Creator. Were we really listening? Were we really giving ear? And if so, how will our lives change now? What are you going to do with the messages you heard from the Bima, from the Siddur, from God, and from your heart? How are you going to really listen? How are you going to give ear? The story is told of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that he'd always get frustrated that he would give a speech and then go to a reception line, and people really wouldn't listen to what he would say to them in the reception line as he was going through and shaking hand after hand. So President Roosevelt decided to greet each person in this way. I murdered my grandmother this morning. And sure enough, he shook the first person's hand and he said, I murdered my grandmother this morning. And the person responded, oh, great job, well done, Mr. President. And sure enough, he would go to each and every person. I did this to my grandmother this morning. Oh, Mr. President, excellent words. Thank you so much. Oh, yes, you're right. Absolutely, Mr. President. Till finally, he went through 100 people, and he came at the very end to the ambassador to Belgium. And sure enough, President Roosevelt said the same thing. I murdered my grandmother this morning. To which the ambassador of Belgium promptly said, I'm sure she deserved it. This Shabbat of Parashat Haazinu, we're called to listen, to give ear with our entire being to the messages of the Torah. But perhaps also, since Haazinu falls now after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, perhaps the message is we give ear to the words of the Torah. But let's listen, let's truly listen to the messages of the high holidays. And when we have a relationship, when we're in a relationship with another, or when we're simply speaking to another, let's do a lot more listening. Remember, God gave us 2 ears, but only 1 mouth. This Shabbat of Parashat Haazinu, let's take the hint. Shabbat Shalom.